Dr. Michael Henderson had always believed that medicine was about more than just treating symptoms. At 32, he had already learned what many physicians twice his age were still discovering: that healing often began with the smallest acts of human compassion. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of St. Mary's Medical Center as Michael made his way through the intensive care unit. His footsteps were soft against the polished floor, a habit he'd developed over the years. In places where people fought for their lives, even footsteps should whisper hope, not thunder with urgency. Room 314 had been his regular stop for the past 6 months. Inside lay Catherine Walsh, a woman whose name appeared regularly in the society pages of the local newspaper. At 58, she had built a business empire that spanned 3 states. Her construction company had shaped the skyline of their city, and her charitable foundation had quietly funded dozens of community programs. Yet here she lay, surrounded by machines that breathed for her, monitored her heart, and kept her body functioning while her mind remained unreachable. The accident had been sudden. A rainy evening in November, a patch of black ice, and a moment that changed everything. Catherine had been driving home from her granddaughter's piano recital when her car skidded off the mountain road. The rescue had taken hours, and by the time they reached her, the damage was extensive. 6 months later, she remained in a deep coma, her prognosis uncertain. Michael approached her bedside with the same gentle care he brought to all his patients. But something about Catherine's situation had always touched him differently. Perhaps it was the way her daughter, Sarah, visited every morning reading aloud from Catherine's favorite mystery novels. Or maybe it was how her granddaughter, Emma, would sit quietly doing homework in the corner chair, as if keeping vigil could somehow call her grandmother back. Good morning, Mrs. Walsh, Michael said softly, though he knew she couldn't respond. He had learned from his mentor, Dr. Patricia Clearwater, that patients in comas often retained some level of awareness. Speaking to them wasn't just professional courtesy, it was human decency. Today's task was routine but necessary. Catherine's bandages needed changing where the feeding tube entered her abdomen. It was a simple procedure, but Michael had noticed something troubling during his last examination. The dressing had been applied too tightly by the night shift, and the skin around the site was showing signs of irritation. As Michael carefully removed the old bandage, he found himself thinking about his own grandmother, Rose, who had passed away when he was in medical school. She had been a seamstress, and her hands had always been gentle, whether she was mending a torn dress or soothing a fevered forehead. "The hands remember kindness," she used to say. "Long after words are forgotten, the touch remains." The damaged skin beneath the bandage was worse than he had expected. The previous dressing had been secured with medical tape that was too harsh for Catherine's delicate skin. The adhesive had pulled away several layers of tissue, leaving an angry red wound that would have been painful if she could feel it. Michael frowned, not in anger but in concern. He had seen this before. The hurried efficiency of overworked staff, the small corners cut when time was short and patients were many. It wasn't malicious, just human fallibility in an imperfect system. But this was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, and she deserved better. He reached for the supply cabinet and selected the gentlest materials available. Instead of the standard adhesive tape, he chose a silk-backed variety that would be kinder to her skin. Rather than the usual gauze, he picked up the softer, more expensive alternative that the hospital typically reserved for burn victims and children. "I'm sorry this happened," he murmured as he began to clean the irritated area with the most delicate touch he could manage. "We're going to take better care of you." The cleaning process was slow and methodical. Michael used warm saline solution and cotton swabs so soft they barely disturbed the damaged tissue. He had learned long ago that healing required patience, and patience required time that busy hospitals rarely provided. But this morning, he made time. As he worked, he found himself talking to Catherine about small things. The weather outside, how the spring flowers were beginning to bloom in the hospital's courtyard garden. The way the morning light painted patterns on the wall. He told her about his wife, Jennifer, who taught third grade and came home with stories about 8-year-olds who still believed in magic. He mentioned his elderly neighbor, Mr. Patterson, who had started leaving homemade cookies on his doorstep every Tuesday, claiming he made too many for just one person. Asterisk, you know, Michael said as he prepared the new dressing. I think kindness is like those cookies. There's always enough to share, and somehow, giving it away makes you feel fuller, not emptier. Asterisk, he applied a thin layer of healing ointment to the affected area, then positioned the new bandage with the care of someone handling delicate china. The silk backing felt smooth against Catherine's skin, and he secured it with the minimum amount of pressure necessary to keep it in place. Asterisk there, he said, stepping back to examine his work. That should be much more comfortable. Asterisk, as he began to gather his supplies, Michael noticed something that made him pause. Catherine's fingers, which had been still for so long, seemed to twitch slightly. It was barely perceptible movement, but in 6 months of caring for her, he had never seen anything like it. Asterisk, he moved closer, watching carefully. There it was again, a subtle flexing of her right hand, as if she were trying to grasp something just beyond her reach. Asterisk, Mrs. Walsh, he said softly, leaning closer. Catherine, can you hear me? Asterisk for a moment. Nothing happened. Then slowly, like sunrise breaking over a distant mountain, Catherine's eyelids began to flutter. The movement was so gradual that Michael wasn't sure he was seeing it correctly. But then, with a soft intake of breath that seemed to echo through the quiet room, her eyes opened. Asterisk, the confusion was immediate and complete. Catherine looked around the room with the bewildered expression of someone waking from a dream that had lasted half a year. Her gaze found Michael's face, and in her eyes, he saw questions forming faster than her mind could process them. Asterisk, it's okay, Michael said, his voice steady, despite the racing of his own heart. You're safe. You're in the hospital, and you're going to be fine. Asterisk, Catherine tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented any sound. Her hand moved again, this time with clear intention, reaching toward Michael. He took her fingers gently in his own, feeling the warmth of life returning to her touch. Asterisk, don't try to talk just yet, he told her. I'm going to get your daughter. She's been waiting for you to wake up. Asterisk, as Michael called for the medical team and reached for the phone to contact Catherine's family. He found himself thinking about his grandmother's words. The hands remember kindness. Perhaps that was what had happened here. Perhaps, in some mysterious way, the gentle touch of compassion had reached through the darkness of her coma and reminded her body how to find its way back to consciousness. Asterisk, the next hour was a blur of medical procedures and joyful tears. Sarah arrived within minutes, her face streaming with happiness as she held her mother's hand. Emma followed soon after, her young voice chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to tell her grandmother. Asterisk later, after the breathing tube had been removed and Catherine's voice had returned to her. She asked Michael about those final moments before she woke up. Asterisk, I felt someone being kind to me, she said, her voice still hoarse but filled with wonder. I was in this dark place, and I felt these gentle hands taking care of me. It was like ... like someone was calling me home. Asterisk, Michael smiled, thinking of his grandmother, of Mr. Patterson's cookies, of his wife's stories about magical 8-year-olds. Maybe, he said quietly, that's what kindness really is. It's a way of calling each other home. Asterisk, Catherine Walsh recovered fully over the following months. Her business empire resumed its growth, and her foundation expanded its reach. But she never forgot the morning she woke up to find that kindness had been her bridge back to the world of the living. Asterisk and Michael Henderson continued his rounds at St. Mary's Medical Center, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of human compassion can work the greatest miracles, in a world that often seemed to move too fast and care too little. He had learned that gentle hands and patient hearts could still change everything. Asterisk, after all, as his grandmother had always said, the hands remember kindness. And sometimes that memory is enough to light the way home.